Not too sure if you can thank Mike Hopkins, but 2 Huskies won Pac-12 honors on Tuesday.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That gentleman stretched and getting warmed up right there is Lars Hanson. He writes for Inside the Huskies of Fan Nation Sports Illustrated. I'm the site editor over with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen today, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network. And Lars, some big news coming for a couple members of the Huskies on Tuesday, as Keion Brooks was named to the All-Pac-12 First Team and Koren Johnson won Pac-12 Sixth Player of the Year, which is really great to see. As I said in the opener, can we really thank Mike Hopkins? We'll get into that a little bit, but it's really cool to see because on Keion Brooks' side, he cements his legacy as a Husky great. Were people always paying attention? No. Was that his fault? Also no. And Koren Johnson, also, if he decides to come back for his junior season, this is just another notch in his belt as he continues to ascend, being a hometown guy. That's all really cool. And just, he can still be a huge focal point of Washington's offense and really just team as a whole in 2024.
Yeah, well, it's kind of symbolic, the stretching out, Keion Brooks Jr. being a stretch 3, as we've talked about off the show a couple of times. But I do think there is a little bit of credit, not to push back on you, but there is a little bit of credit that Mike Hopkins has to get, because Keion Brooks didn't do what he's done the past 2 seasons at Kentucky that he's done at Washington. So I think Mike Hopkins, Quincy Pondexter, the entire staff deserve, again, maybe Quincy Pondexter,
sure,
credit. But, again, got to give Mike Hopkins just a little bit of credit for that. And then also I think you got to give Hopkins some criticism because, again, I was a big fan of Paul Mulcahy, the transfer, because getting a 4-year starter from Rutgers, a kind of solid staple guard, and he was fine, but his role in this system turned out to be the kind of that veteran, the guy that gets the pass to the guy that makes the shot, right? It's the one that's not really seen in the stat book. He's not going to put up, 15, 20, 22 a game, but he's going to be the guy that does everything, especially on defense. And that's why Koren coming off the bench was the scoring plug. But I will say Koren, I think, got a lot better on defense. So that was kind of a catch-22 where you can't fault Hopkins for bringing in a veteran guard, because let's say he doesn't and Koren doesn't get as better on defense, and then that's maybe why they don't do as well this season. Well, if you have the resources, it's not the worst thing in the world to go get experience, but maybe that should have been a big instead of a guard, because I think we've talked about on the show the past couple of days where it's like, hey, you kind of had too many guards on this roster and not enough serviceable bigs. But Koren Johnson certainly did develop under Will Conway and Mike Hopkins. So I think without question, I mean, that's the question, does Koren come back, right? Because it's not, does he come back or go to the NBA? Because I think he still needs a little bit more to refine in his game to truly kind of take that Matisse Thybulle stretch, right? I'm not saying he's going to be Matisse Thybulle, but we saw Matisse Thybulle be good his sophomore year and then really develop his junior and senior year.
Right. And that's especially when he was utilized a little bit differently in that aspect, which, that's where you can especially give a lot of credit to Hopkins and the way he developed Matisse Thybulle and just kind of utilized him as part of that 2-3 zone. But I kind of like the comparison that you're making there, because with Koren, we saw him, especially later on in the season, make a huge jump as a scorer and just kind of really control the offense at times and control just everything that was going on the floor and really turn into the true point guard that you were looking for, where he was doing a lot of scoring for the majority of the season. And, he leads all Pac-12 bench players in scoring this season, which is really cool to see. And you just see that progression moving forward. But just speaking of scoring, I really do want to talk about Keion Brooks, because I mean, there's a certain point where he wins all Pac-12 First Team, doesn't win Player of the Year. That goes to Arizona's Caleb Love, and, no fault in that. But when you look at what Keion has done over his 2 years at Washington, he's cemented himself as one of the better players that has gone through this program in a very long time. But it just felt like nobody was paying attention. And that's where I really do want to say that falls on Mike Hopkins for not being able to put a really good team around him for the most part, where it's not knocking the individual guys, but Hopkins couldn't bring them all together for the common goal.
Exactly right. He's a guy that's great at acquiring talent, but not good at putting that talent together. And I know that sounds kind of bizarre to say, because if you're acquiring the talent, you are putting it together. It's like, right. But there's being a general manager and signing those players. And then there's the coach. Mike Hopkins might be a great general manager, actually, because in terms of when you look at his talent and ability to kind of identify talent, but he just can't coach it. And for whatever, and ironically, it's like, well, why was he an assistant coach for 20 years? He was the guy that could be just, I'll help in this regard. I'll help with this guy. And that's why with Keion Brooks, hey, we can really kind of focus on Keion and turn him into a really talented player, one of the top players in the Pac-12, and certainly to your point, one of the better players in program history. But then what about besides him? Like Keion can't score. Even if Keion scores, let's say, because he led the conference in scoring, right? Or one of the top. Yeah. So let's say Keion scores 30 a game, which is about 8 or 9 points above his season average. That still doesn't really change anything, because then that means probably somebody else is not getting 5 points that they would have got, right? So it doesn't end up changing the result. And he tried to put pieces around it, right? You bring in Severe Wheeler, Keion's former teammate, but it worked, right? Again, it's not a shot at Severe, right? Because Severe was doing everything. I mean, you saw the win against Washington State showed what that team could be, right? You beat a top 25 team on the road, but it was almost like, well, hey guys, let's do this for Hop. It's like, well, when you're already at that point, you're kind of a sitting duck, right? You're kind of dead on arrival, right? It's, hey, let's play for him. Let's play for him. Well, what have we been doing the past 2 months? Like, not playing for him? Like,
and when you talk about his scoring, you kind of have to look at the other side of that, which is this was the worst scoring defense in the conference this season, which, switching from out of the 2-3 zone, it was something that needed to happen, but it never clicked and it never came together. And for one reason or another, because obviously you've been in person covering this team a lot more than I have, but it never really felt like it clicked for one reason or another, which was just frustrating to see when you waste the talent of somebody like Keion Brooks. And I hate to be that harsh, but that's exactly what it is.
Right. And the elephant in the room is, well, you can't just pour. And that's why I said maybe, again, for all that Paul McKay did as a veteran, and maybe even help Koren and some of the other guards that we didn't get to see that we'll see down the road. But to not have Frank Capnong for the back half of the season after the Seattle U game, that's an easy scapegoat, but that more or less means, well, why did you not have more depth there, right? Because Wilhelm Breidenbach, a serviceable forward, is now being put at the 5, right? So, and Moses Wood is your forward. Like that to me just kind of said, hey, we're gonna abandon defense and we're just gonna try and outscore everybody, because no slight to either of those two guys, but I don't think of either of them as consistent defensive threats on a possession basis.
Sure, and we've seen Braxton Mia definitely improve over his time at UW, but there's still another step he needs to take on the defensive end. He still needs to get a little bit stronger, but it's that same thing where he can't do everything at that center position, and the fact that there was nobody behind him just really it fell apart really quickly, as you said, after Frank Capnong went down for the year.
Yeah, and that's where again it gets back to, okay, you can build just looking at the roster, it was great, and you knew they were going to score, right? Because you just looked at the guards. You had Severe, Nate Calmes, Koren Johnson, a number of guys, and it's like, okay, you have a lot of guards. Someone's going to get left out. Why are you basically wasting that scholarship? And that's not I'm not even going to mention a player just to say you're wasting, because it's not wasted on them. It should have been spent somewhere else in a different position. So that way, because let's say, let's say Braxton Mia plays great and then he also gets hurt. You can't predict injuries, but that's why you want to have a little more depth spread out throughout your roster. It's, again, this is a terrible football analogy, but it's like you're not going to have 14 wide receivers and 2 tight ends and maybe some bigger receivers. That this isn't NCAA 14 where you just take your lowest rated receivers and kick them over to tight end just to fill the position, right? It's you want to actually be able to, if you're going to, well, let me caveat that by saying, if you want to keep your job and you want to win, you might want to spread out that talent throughout the positions on your roster, because I think also knowing that you're going to switch out of the 2-3 zone, which Braxton Mia thrived in, and Hopkins pointed that out on multiple times this season. Braxton led our conference in defense. Like, well, yeah, in the 2-3 zone. So if you're going to go out of the zone, get somebody else behind him and Frank just as a serviceable body, or even as another forward, to say, hey, we need you to play the 4 or the 5 in a non-2-3 zone defense. And he didn't have that body.
Lars, with that being said, you talked about Mike Hopkins as a general manager. Let's talk about a general manager who will be on campus next month, and John Schneider. Right after a message from our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with the eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. All the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. So, Lars, as we said, John Schneider is going to be on campus for Washington's coaching clinic at the beginning of April. And he's not the only one. Mike Macdonald, the Seahawks head coach, is also signed up to be a part of it. Bill Belichick is going to be there. And this is really, really cool because Jedd Fisch has called Washington the 33rd NFL team. That's become their new brand on social media, which is fun. It's cool. I enjoy it. And it's just really cool to see him flexing these connections and everything it is that he has from the NFL level just so early and often, and saying, hey, yeah, we're going to bring in a bunch of high school coaches. We're going to talk to them, but we want to make sure that we can bring in some of the best to help show, hey, not only if you have a top recruit, this is why they should come to Washington, but we want to make sure that everybody in the area is taken care of and can learn from the best.
Exactly. Well, I think it's a twofold bonus, because you have to imagine also the Husky coaches are going to be at that clinic and taking in that knowledge as well. So I think it's not just about benefiting the high school coaches, because again, that's more of like a good community service thing that Jedd Fisch is doing, right? Hey, like, we're not just going to gatekeep this to maybe 100 people. We want as many people that can come to be able to attend and soak up this knowledge that we have to offer. But with that being said, it also is going to help the coaches, because you can have Steve Belichick relay some Belichick information, but actually, imagine, Scotty Graham hearing a Kevin Falk story from Bill Belichick, and Scotty thinking, oh, hey, you know what? Maybe I'll file that one away. That's a double Patriot plug for you. You're welcome.
I respect it.
But but it's small things like that where you can kind of it's not going to be the reason why they win 9, 10, 11 games, right? But it's the small little things that somebody can add to what their experience already has, and say, hey, you know what, I learned a lot from this coaching clinic. I learned a lot from this job shadow or experience. And it's not going to be the singular reason, but all those little things, and again, it's a coaching cliche, right? Perfectly fitted for a coaching clinic, where all those little things legitimately do add up. I mean, we talked to Eric Schmidt about that, where it's like, hey, coaches use a lot of cliches, and it's always coach speak, but there is a lot of element of truth in coach speak, whether we like it or not.
So I have two things for you. The first thing is, and I love the Kevin Falk reference personally, but the Corey Dillon reference was sitting right there as a former Husky, and you just totally swung and missed there. So that's on you. No, I'm kidding. But the second thing is, this is just really cool for me, because it really can be a major tool that's used on the recruiting trail as well, where and it's something we've talked about before, especially after the Steve Belichick hire was made, where, you don't want to overlook the hire, because you and I have both talked at length about how much we like that and all the things that it can do for this program. But Bill Belichick being his dad is part of that, where, of course, that wasn't reasons 1 through 100 as to why Steve Belichick was hired as UW's defensive coordinator. But when you look at that and you say, hey, yeah, this is something that could absolutely help us out, you don't think that that's something that he's going to try to, I don't want to use the term exploit because it's not where it is, but utilize where he can. And when Jedd Fisch looks at it and just says, oh, this is also somebody that I worked under, so I have a really good relationship with, because I'm sure Jedd would have wanted to stay in New England if he could, but got offered the head coaching job at Arizona, which is a huge step up for him. So it's really cool to see how that has all worked out for him. And then just getting Bill Belichick on Montlake personally is something that I will be nerding out over for months and months and months to come. But I just really like where it can go, because, it can send a message and just say, oh, hey, yeah, if you go to UW, you never know who might be walking through that door one day. It could be Pete Carroll. It could be Bill Belichick. It could be John Schneider. That's just really fun.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's the thing is, having an NFL team in your backyard is one thing, right? You can look at colleges. I mean, USC can say, hey, we got the Rams and the Chargers, right? And again, now USC is a different cell, but UCLA could also have that same cell, right? Where, hey, just because you have an NFL team, in your vicinity doesn't necessarily mean a lot, but then when you look at John Schneider, how many games does he go to? He goes to at least 2 or 3 every year and stayed for the entire thing. I've seen him at multiple Apple Cups where it's like, okay, you're probably not even drafting anybody, but you're still looking and evaluating and making that appearance. And so it's a give and take between Jedd bringing these guys in and keeping that relationship, and John and the Seahawks also saying, hey, you know what? Well, I mean, because here's the thing. Pete Carroll's been here for a long time. It's just now that Brennan Carroll's here. So now that those two are together, and we saw Milton Hopkins post the photo with Pete Carroll, I believe the day of the press conference, where it's like, hey, look who's in the building. And now, again, we had some fun before Jedd filled out his staff saying, hey, Pete.
For sure.
But we, in reality, we weren't far off, where it's like, but think of that level of caliber of DC, right? NFL guy, Mike Macdonald. Where did he start out a couple years ago? Ravens, Michigan, back to the NFL. And so it's like, if you're Steve Belichick, hey, I'm a young guy. I used to be in the NFL. Now I'm back in college like Mike Macdonald was at Michigan, setting up a defense. And I could probably go back to the NFL if I want to, or I could stay, right? Does Steve Belichick like dealing with recruits and NIL and having to say, oh, well, this kid needs an extra?
That remains to be seen. I will refrain on my thoughts on the Nick Saban comment about, about what NIL has turned into. Pot calling kettle black. I'm sorry. I'll stop there. But Lars, real quick, we do have to remind everybody that you have to mark your calendar for the Locked On College Basketball Bracket Breakdown Show, which will be on Monday, March 18th at 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Our experts, Andy Patton and Isaac Shad, will break down their brackets and discuss everything that you need to know to fill out a winning bracket and prepare for this year's NCAA tournament. You can find the Locked On Bracket Breakdown on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Sorry, Lars, I just had to get that in there. Please continue.
No, you're all good. But that's exactly kind of the thing. It's where, it's one thing to have connections, right? I mean, not Harvard got anything, but Jimmy Lake had connections, right? But we didn't see this level of. I mean, Jimmy Lake went down and he bought in on the same level, but went down a different path with it. This is Jedd saying, hey, look, I have all these NFL connections, but I want to use them for the benefit of others. I don't want to say, hey, you know what? I did this. This is what I can do. It's like, okay, but what can you do for me? And what can I actually get out of it besides, because that's, I mean, to your point about Nick Saban, where it's like, kids would always take discounts, quote unquote, to play for Nick Saban, where instead of making $1 million, they're making $500,000, right? Because, hey, I'll make that up on the back end because Saban's, going to get me to the NFL and I'll get a guaranteed $20 million contract as a first round pick. Whereas if I go to Kentucky and they offer me 1.5, yeah, I might still be a first round or maybe early day 2 pick, but I'll get more playing time and maybe more NIL money in the front end, but I won't get as much on the back end. And that's why Jedd is saying, hey, we're the 33rd NFL team. By the way, somebody's got to deal with the Washington Commanders, because having 2 Washington teams is in the NFL is just not what we're trying to do here. So with that being said, and I know they're probably going to rebrand that thing anyways, because that was just a weird segue away from a terrible brand. But with that being said, there's ways to sell it. And I think the way that Jedd is doing it, where he's bringing in the high school coaches, because whether or not he's not doing this to say, hey, we're trying to get all the in-state kids, right? Because he's going to be real. Like, look, if we had an entire roster full of Washington high school kids, we're not competing in the Big Ten. Like, no offense to Washington kids, but you're just the level of football is not realistic.
Right. If you could only recruit players from your state, California, Texas, and Florida are probably going to dominate everything. But I'm really intrigued to see how this is going to work out going forward, because I don't think this is going to be a one-time deal, which is one of the other parts about this that's so significant, where when you look at it and you can just say, yeah, it's really cool that these guys are coming in now, but let's look at what Kalen DeBoer was able to do over the last couple of seasons, repairing some alumni relations and having guys come speak at practice. That just it's one of those things where it feels like that's what this is the start of, where when you can move forward and you can say, all right, yeah, John Schneider and, Mike Macdonald probably aren't going to be able to come speak at practice once a week, but it's something that Steve Belichick has already talked about too on the Greenlight podcast with Chris Long, where he said, yeah, I'm sure my dad's going to come out and visit a couple times and be around and do whatever he can. And Jedd's hinted at it as well with Pete Carroll and Bill Belichick, who both are not working in the NFL this season. So it's just that possibility. And you hate to kind of sit here and speculate and just be like, oh, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? But it's already paying off. And we're already seeing that, because we talked about it at length with both of these guys already, where you want to see if you can repair those relations, because in this world of college football where recruiting is so important to what you're doing and just finding any way you possibly can to bring in talent, this is a very big part of that. And just saying, we can go get Mike Macdonald, who you or your coaches can learn from, because obviously you have to be a high school coach to attend one of these events, but just saying, oh, hey, look at who's going to be on campus. Yeah. Who knows if I'm going to run into these guys or not. That's all part of this at a certain point.
Exactly. I mean, I think segue is kind of perfect into what we'll talk about in the future, because when you send guys to the NFL, they now can sell your program, and that's a double sell. So it all works out into a big cycle as long as but the only way to do that is starting off that first leg, saying, hey, you know what, we're going to bring these guys around. We're going to pay attention to all these relationships, build them up. Because when John Schneider comes to Jedd Fisch and says, hey, what about these players? Like, he knows he's not getting a sales pitch. He's getting hey, I know your players. I know your coaches. I know what they're saying. And Husky fans always talk about, hey, how did Taylor Rapp and Budda Baker and all these guys not get drafted by the Seahawks? Well, maybe the relationship wasn't as good. Who knows?
Sure. I can't say it's most likely that, but it's a fair thing to discuss. And Lars, with that being said, a couple of Huskies have, earned some new contracts over the first couple of days of free agency. And we'll get into that right after we send a message to our good friends over at FanDuel, because you can say goodbye to busted brackets, because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the tourney. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a one seed, it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sports book. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on anything from points, spreads, money lines. You can even pick who's going to win it all. And you can do all that by just visiting FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. Lars, I feel like it might be sacrilege to say this, but I wouldn't mind betting on the UConn Huskies. And for Husky fans on the show, I feel like that might be the easiest thing to do, where some people might say, oh, no, you don't want to bet on the other Huskies, but some might enjoy that. So, Lars, over the first couple of days of free agency, we've seen 3 Huskies sign new deals. We saw Will Dissly, who got released as a cap casualty by the Seattle Seahawks, quickly find a new home with the Los Angeles Chargers. Drew Sample signed a 3-year extension with the Cincinnati Bengals, and Greg Gaines re-signed with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And it's really cool to see, because we'll start with 2 tight ends. Because who was their position coach, Lars? Can you remind me about that one? Because I think he's a name that might be pretty familiar with Jedd Fisch's staff as well.
Pow! Right, the kiss up. Pow. You like that?
Yeah. That was great.
And it's actually great because it's a pow. So it's a double punch. Drew Sample and Will Dissly. And what did I tell you? But what did I tell you before the show started? The ironic part about all 3 of these guys:
Boise State commits at one time.
That very first class of Chris Peterson. Think about Jedd Fisch's class and all the 3 stars that have been brought over. I'm just saying. Hey. I'm just saying. Think about this in 2 or 3 years. That's all I'm going to say.
So that's a really good point. And I kind of want to go through this, because one of the things that you just talked about is the selling point of the NFL, and saying, hey, look at these second contracts, look at these third contracts these guys got. And here are 3 great examples of that right there. And with Will Dissly, I think this is a really cool fit with him going to the Chargers, where I'm really intrigued to see what they're going to do in the draft. Shout out to our buddy Alex Katzen, who writes for me over at Huskies Wire and is a huge Chargers fan. But he's going to fit really well into that scheme. And I think that Will Dissly is somebody who could be a big contributor for Justin Herbert and just be a big security blanket on a team that's looking to get younger. I know he's not necessarily the youngest guy in the world at 27. It's weird to say that. It is what it is, or whatever, 27, 28. And it's really fun to see that's what the fit is going to be, because the Chargers struggled at tight end last year. Gerald Everett's moved on, and they were just looking for somebody who can do a little bit of both as they look to get younger, look to get under the salary cap. And he's just a really good fit for that team, and could probably have a career year this year, honestly. And, it sounds like you're blowing smoke at that point, but it's just a really nice fit on a team that's looking for some extra pass catching help.
Yeah, I mean, think about what Justin Herbert had success with at Oregon, with a number of those tight ends, and then think about what Jim Harbaugh did with Colson Loveland at Michigan. Like, Will Dissly is that similar style tight end where, again, he's not going to wow. He's not Travis Kelce. He's not going to wow you as that, 100-yard-a-game kind of guy, but he's certainly going to make all the key plays and make certainly all the blocks as well in the run department. So those little things are going to – Jim Harbaugh won a championship at Michigan for it by running Blake Corum 32 times in a row and just like, hey, you know what? Here we go.
And if Will Dissly ends up being a guy that averages 4 catches for 45 yards in a game, it's not bad. It's nothing to sneeze at right there. And just it's a really nice fit for him going there. And we can't forget the fact that he's an excellent blocker as well, which is something you can also say about Drew Sample, who surprised a lot of people when he was picked in the second round. It took him a little while to get going, but it was really fun watching him just get better over the course of this last season as well, which after the Bengals lost Irv Smith certainly played into him getting a contract extension. But Lars, remind me, I know it's silly, but we're going to keep doing this. Remind me, who was Drew Sample's quarterback for the majority of the second half of the season this past year?
That'd be one Jake Browning.
It would be one Jacob Browning, yes. Which is cool because Jake probably helped make him some money. Jake definitely made himself some money whenever he ends up hitting free agency. But it's another thing where I know I keep using the same phrase, but it's really cool to see how he's developed, especially after getting hurt in his first couple of seasons. He's become I don't want to say a vital piece, but definitely a nice contributor for the Bengals. And, when you have the star power of, I know Joe Mixon's not there anymore. I know T. Higgins wants to trade, but when you have Joe Burrow, when you have Jamar Chase, you're not ever going to really stand out and be the highlight. But if you can just be somebody who does your job, is serviceable, that's what 90% of players in the NFL are.
Well, and it's what the tight end position truly is, because I remember talking with Nick Sheridan about this during last season, where he's like, look, for all the Travis Kelce's and for all the Jordan Kittles, right? Like, everybody wants to be those
Shout
guys,
out Rob Gronkowski.
Right? Gronk before he retired, right? But those guys are outliers. They are enigmas, if you will, right? They're maybe what the ceiling is, right? Which you maybe would want to be. But more often than not, a tight end has to be able to do 3 or 4 different things. I mean, think about being an H-back, think about being a lead blocker, think about being a delayed blocker, right? Where you're blocking first and then splitting out, right? There's multiple different uses for tight ends. And I think that's why I know it's going to sound cheap in hindsight, but that's why I always thought Drew Sample would work, because he's always that guy that just does the little things. He's not going to wow you. That's right. He's not going to be like a Hall of Famer stats-wise, but he's going to be the guy that, when you look at the Bengals run to the Super Bowl, it was like, well, he was always that guy, a couple catches here, maybe a key touchdown here, 2 catches for 16 yards, but he has a touchdown. It's like, well, did they win by 7 or did they lose? And so all those little things add up. And so every kid wants to be the Travis Kelce, George Kittle, but more often than not, just be Drew Sample. You'll be more happy than not.
If you accept your role and just play it, you're going to go far and you're going to keep going. And with those two guys, we talked about the Jordan Pow connection a little bit, but one thing that Jedd Fisch has said, it's about, one of the things about the NFL is, everybody wants to go be a first round pick, but you really want to make sure that you can get to that second contract and make sure you see some real money, which is one of those things that he's been pushing on social media. We know he said it during his signing day press conference. And, when you look at that, you think about the Budda Bakers of the world who got a nice payday. You think about the Vita Veas of the world. And while those are awesome, and you want to make sure that you can develop as many of those guys as you possibly can, sometimes being Vita Vea's running mate isn't half bad, like Greg Gaines was at Washington, and now will continue to be in Tampa Bay, where he's always been the guy who's been the big space eater, stops the run, not ever, considered an elite pass rusher, but can definitely get after a quarterback from time to time, and is just like Will Dissly, just like Drew Sample, somebody who's always just been stout, done his job really well, and been really serviceable.
Yep, exactly. And that's what 95% of the NFL is. It's like there's the 5% of the top end earners, but you can also flame out pretty quickly. Whereas if you want to have a 10, 12-year career, why not? Just do all the little things and maybe have a couple of breakout seasons. And it's same thing with Will Dissly, right? Where it's like, again, he's not going to wow you, but again, it's why he was coveted right after getting cut, right? If you kind of are just hanging around and doing whatever, you're either a veteran who is picking your spot for a ring, or maybe you're not as coveted as you think you should be. And so I think these guys getting all picked up pretty quickly, or, in Greg's case, staying in Tampa, it's all the little things, right? For every Vita, there's more Greg Gaines, right? But Greg Gaines is also not as easy as it sounds, right? So I think having all look at anybody's life, right? It's hard to consistently do anything very well. And so if you consistently do the little things very well, sometimes that goes a long way.
Absolutely. And that's one thing that Greg has always done really well. And it's fun to see him just staying in Tampa Bay, where, you have to talk about the Husky connection, where Kate Otton's there, Vita Vea is there, Joe Tryon's still there, where it's fun to have all of these Huskies in the same place. It's nice to see that Jason Light, Tampa's general manager, is willing to take a risk on so many of those guys, and it's paid off for him so many times. And who knows, maybe he goes back to that well again. seems like they're going to be out of the Michael Penix sweepstakes, where they're probably not going to take a quarterback after paying Baker all that money. But hey, if, second, third round, they say, oh, maybe we'll take a chance on a Braylon Trice because we need another outside linebacker, edge rusher kind of guy. Or, oh, hey, maybe, yeah, we could use another safety, so we'll take Dominic Hampton in the 5th round because all these Huskies have worked for us before. Why not go with another one? Or they need another linebacker, whatever it might be. And they take Edefwani Olofosio. There are so many ways that this can pay off and move the Huskies forward in terms of just their perception around the NFL.
Exactly. And I think that you nailed it on the head at the end there, but the perception of the NFL is if you continue to have guys in the NFL, you have a positive perception, right? Not everybody's going to hit, right? But the year in and year out churning, where last year they don't have anybody drafted, but that's because you're going to have probably a record number drafted this year. So going in and year out, you're not going to have this level, but having, what do you want to say, 3-4 guys at minimum to the NFL every year?
Sure.
That's a good mark. But you 7 or 8 on a good year. Oh, well, I guess this year would be probably 10, right? Something like that. But
maybe more.
But again, if you can hit even 7 on a consistent basis, but even if you can hit 7 on a consistent basis, maybe a couple first-round picks, something like that will continue to validate Jedd's, hey, we are the 33rd NFL team. Look how many different teams have at least 1 or 2 Huskies on them that are consistently contributing.
No, that's a great point, and that's probably a great place to wrap up for today. Because Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all the everydayers for tuning in. We have so much more fun stuff coming for you your way this offseason. Please make sure you stay tuned wherever you get your podcast, whether it's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. So please make sure you subscribe, hit that like button, hit the notification bell so you never miss when we post a new video. Because we posted a little surprise bonus when I was on Lockdown College Football with our good buddy Spencer McLaughlin the other day, and again, please make sure to leave a comment down below if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. And if you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review, as it all really does help the show out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you on Thursday.